Good morning, everyone. This is Carl Dakin, and this is the Community Revitalization Show. This show is presented by RCI Community Funds and RCI Academy. We'll be talking a little bit more about each of those companies and what they're doing today. My co host with me this morning is Stephen Schaff. Stephen is a consultant on community organization and coordination in support of community goals and advancement of economic opportunities. And with us today as our guest is Don Cohen, who I refer to as the Don of LinkedIn. Don is an expert in communications with a specialization in LinkedIn as a social media platform and how to use all the tricks and tools and techniques that are there to help people tell their story, build their brand. And today we're going to talk about it in the context of working with communities to help communicate information within the community to help establish community identity and to build the brand of the community so there's a sense of unity amongst the residents. Um, our focus within RCI communities is within what we call underserved or economically distressed or disinvested communities, ones that are below the American average, who have been passed by for a variety of reasons. And we're trying to help them rebuild, redevelop, and get their feet back underneath of them. And in doing that, quite often the community experiences a bit of loss of identity. They may not know their neighbor. They may not know what they're doing together in common with others. And this is part of what is called the social capital of a community that demonstrates that there is something more than each of the individuals separately, but collectively they represent a greater capability, a greater opportunity. So, with that, first I'm going to ask Steve to introduce himself, a little bit more background, and talk about the concept of community organization and coordination from a communication standpoint. And then we're going to grill Don with hard questions, hardball questions for the remainder of the hour until we know everything we need to know. So that's going to set the table for today. Steve, share some information, please.
All right, so I'll sit back, relax, take it easy. For the next few hours, I'll be glad to give you my entire background. I started out as an affordable housing developer 30 some odd years ago in the Washington, D.C. Communities. And the reason why I got into housing was to help change communities by going into underserved, disinvested communities and helping with rebuilding housing. That was the concept, and I learned very quickly that that's not how you change communities. It is a very complicated process. So fast forward 30 some odd years, I developed a background and expertise not only in affordable housing in very rough neighborhoods, but also community and political organizing. Being from DC, I've been very involved with national politics. So after all these years, I developed an expertise in social enterprise, how it can be a solution, but also how it is really difficult to implement into communities that just don't have the resources, the expertise, the background of how you improve and invest in your own communities. So, of course, the most common need in these communities is access to capital, which will be the gist of what RCI Academy and RCI Community Funds is about, is how do you, one, put the capital together and make sure it's invested in a way that has long-term effects that help hopefully avoid the impact of gentrification to other unintended consequences. So with Don and his background and other networks of experts, we hope to really put some or implement some infrastructure that really gets down into the minutia of how you do this. And it takes a lot of people power and collaboration from multiple sectors.
Very good. So Don, good morning. Looking forward to your input on this hyper-focused community communication challenge that we're talking about. And I can't emphasize enough Steve's description of how complicated this is. We often talk about a single business or person in isolation, and that's complicated enough. But when we now talk about thousands of people all living in proximity to each other, all in some ways dependent upon each other, whether they know it or not, how do we engage? How do we communicate? How do we enhance that communication?
Well, first of all, I'm very honored and proud to be here today. Although I've done probably about 50 shows with Carl on my own show and in other shows, it's always a delight. And every show is a new show and pretty much stands on its own. What I love about this show and live streaming in general is it really gives everybody a chance to tell their true story. And a lot of times, all you see is the face of the business or the sign or whatever it is, the name. You don't know what's behind it. And there's so many quality stories that need to be heard and appreciated to be valued. And because it's so democratic and it's so cost and time effective, it almost seems like an important element that everybody needs to have in their PR campaign, in their marketing campaign, but more than anything else in their outreach campaign because of the amplified reach and the leverage you have. There's a billion people registered on LinkedIn. And if you then pair more channels like Facebook and YouTube, it gets enormous and allows for quality niches, which is what Stephen's talking about and Carl, is that identifying with something that the audience in advance knows that you're into. You know, you don't go to a Kentucky Fried Chicken and order Chinese food, right? Because it has chicken in the name. And the same thing on LinkedIn. And the other thing is it shows the dynamic element of the owners or founders, and they have a story. And everybody says facts tell, stories sell. Everybody wants to hear your story. This is a wonderful venue, and it also speaks to the subject at hand, which is community redevelopment, because most people look at something that was and isn't as something that's not coming back, as opposed to a reinvention, and starting over in a sense on something that's already laid some foundation to it. The other thing is you bring together people like Stephen, like myself, and other like-minded people, that you bring thought leadership to the table, you bring valuable content, and it's entertaining, educational, and inspirational. So I'll leave it at that with my start, and I'll swing it back to Carl.
Thank you, Don. Yeah, so one of the challenges in working with the community is you have so many different stakeholders, and a lot of them do not even recognize themselves as having a interest, direct, indirect, tangible, intangible, in the outcome, in the quality, the lifestyle, as you would call it, of a community. And this is one of the things that we are working towards within RCI Community Funds and RCI Academy is talking about rebuilding. And at the rebuilding level, we're using the basic fundamental term of community capital. And we're going to be putting on our first workshop on that topic through the Academy here in a few weeks. We're just finishing off the final touches on getting everything ready to go. But we define community capital as wealth. That's both the personal wealth plus the collective wealth of all the residents, all the businesses, anyone who owns an asset in the community. We have a second level, which is the skill base, the ability of people to perform a job at the highest type of compensation, whether they're running their own business or they're working for someone else. But the third part of this, and it's the hardest one for us to work with, is what we call social capital. And this is essentially a value that only exists where you have people working together rather than working separately. And you can't work together if you're not talking to each other, if you're not sharing the information, you don't have common goals and things of that nature. So one of the things that we're considering is that when we put a community investment fund together in a particular community, it's almost going to be like planting a flag, where a rally around the flag type of thing, where people may suddenly have one thing in common for the first time in a long time that they can all share in and participate in. So, part of it is the challenge is how do we get that word out? How do we help people understand that this is for them, with them, not us, basically mandating or pushing them down when we put something like this together.
Okay.
Steve?
So one of the things that I learned very early in my career was when I announced that I was a for-profit developer with a social agenda, I thought everyone would embrace me, the nonprofit community-based nonprofits, investors who wanted to do some good. And I learned very quickly that no, that's not how the world works. I was met with tremendous skepticism, not because I was seen as someone who was trying to con the community, but as someone who just didn't talk the way everyone else was talking. Developers go into communities, and those that are in the communities, particularly underserved or changing communities or disinvested communities, are very wary of, frankly, white developers like myself coming in and talking a really good game. So I learned very quickly that the nonprofit world was not going to embrace me and who I thought were my natural allies. And at the same time, too, I knew investors who had the capital, because I started out with no capital, were wary of who and why I could get them deals that make sense. So long story short, it took me about 10 years to accumulate enough successes and opportunities in the community that I found because I was literally living and working in these communities. Then investors began to realize, wow, this guy comes up with some pretty good deals. So that's how I kind of won investors over. Even though part of working with me was they knew I had a social and economic justice agenda. We need to make money, but at the same time, too, if we can, do things in a little more environmentally friendly way for our community or consider the community, that was my approach. My investors are like, as long as you're making this money, whatever you say. The nonprofit world, though, of course, they were the tough ones because I was the strange guy coming in and they were wary of me. So it took, like I said, maybe about 10 years to show that, this is really what I want to do in these communities. So with that in mind, though, it made me realize that, again, you need a lot of effort beyond just business skills or real estate skills. And that takes a lot of coordination, a lot of coalition building, a lot of trust, a lot of human nature, really, to put all this together. And to this day, it's still an issue. But I think we realize that the rebuilding or investing in communities is good for the whole society. So there's more avenues and options to do it. Crowdfunding, for example, is a great tool that's only been around for last dozen or so years. Needs some improvements and adjustments, but it is at least an example of how we're beginning to understand that sometimes changing communities requires not the old sources of capital, but literally a collection of a massive number of small investments to come together to do this. And that's, again, part of the RCI mission is to how to really coalesce the strength and make sure this capital gets placed into communities that also have the right connections and competence and uh, uh, wherewithal to rebuild communities that are sensibly safe and sound for more than just the investor. So it's a
So,
tough
so
process.
Don, yeah, so Don, if you basically were on Star Trek and transported to the surface of the planet Earth in an urban community and told that you wanted to share your message of great joy and Thanksgiving to everyone in the community. How do you see that using a platform like LinkedIn, a show like this show, how would that work to let the people know you exist, that you bring tidings of blessings and joy, and this is going to be something that they should rally around, particularly when they may be, as Steve described it, highly skeptical for all kinds of good reasons, that you're just another person trying to take advantage of them.
That's a wonderful question. And while you're asking it, I formulated an answer. You don't have to come down from space to see one of the biggest attributes and benefits of live streaming is knowledge share. And, although raising economic capital and social capital is important, knowledge capital is important. Just like getting the comments today on the screen, sharing views with leaders in the industry like we're doing today. And you get better as you get more consistency in messaging. And it's really having the vision, right? You have to visualize what could be and get enough people to appreciate the vision, adopt it, and join together. The other big element is having that ability to recognize people who typically aren't very well recognized, whether it's vendors, whether it's partners, whether it's associates, and allowing yourself to grow in a compounded way. So if you're learning a little bit from a lot of people every day, that's going to continually improve yourself and your ability to project new information, new knowledge. Some people come up with a wonderful scheme or idea, and it stays right there and they build it instead of building levels of it. And you start out somewhere, and me and Carl know that the first show is never as easy as the second show, but you get better and people see you getting better. And then as you make people better around you, now you've got to create a dynamic environment that's hard to compete with, because it's ever changing, ever growing, ever expanding, and people want to be on your side of the table, want to be a fan in the stands. And I think that's where crowdfunding can come in, where you can extend into other types of collaboration and not limit yourself just to what you started with or the land you have, because I know everything we talk about is about staging and scaling ultimately. It's not a one-trick pony where you build it and that's it. You build it in order to build on top of it. And that's what makes it so interesting. And it gives you a wonderful competitive advantage. If you take what everybody else is doing and show it to everybody else in a different twist, it's still pretty much the same animal. But if you can add the dynamic of outreach, leverage, scale, well, you've got something that goes beyond your initial project into the way you do business, and more importantly, the way you communicate your business. So I think for everybody, it's an exciting opportunity, but more importantly, for underserved, underappreciated communities, it gets them out of the shadows, brings them to the forefront, and actually makes them the innovators that most people aren't appreciating. And because I am a serial entrepreneur and primarily a bootstrapper, I can relate to the little guy with his big dream, starting out with not much, but now leveraging audiences he could never have reached in ways he could have never communicated. So I think it's a wonderful tool. And if I was coming down from Star Trek, I would probably think I was moving to Star Trek too. So hopefully that answers that wonderful question.
Well, one of the things that I've seen, and this is more true in rural communities than urban communities, but we'll kind of distinguish that, is it used to be that to get information on what's happening in your backyard, you just pick up the local paper. And in the rural communities recently, a lot of those papers have gone out of business and there's been no substitute. And it's almost like somebody turned off the sound on your TV. You can't hear anything and you're not getting any information. in the urban communities, what we are seeing is that there is a voice, there is a newspaper that's supposed to cover this huge area, not your neighborhood specifically, but everybody and anybody within 100 miles. And so the voice, the communication within your neighborhood is also almost silent. The only time they may talk about your neighborhood is if something terrible happens, and there's rarely, if any, good information being posted, and there's nothing that speaks to the community working together, doing something collectively for their mutual benefit. So uh, we are thinking about that every community we work with may benefit from setting up their own show like this show, where we have somebody from the community who's a community leader who would lead or moderate the show, and then they in turn could invite other community leaders. They could invite local businesses, people who are running the local charities, even residents could have a voice. And this, we think, would help unify the community, share information, and build, I will say, overcome the resistance or skepticism to either outside people working with them or just anything good happening. I mean, I think one of the biggest problems I see is people get the mindset that they're stuck and there's no way they're ever going to get out of the situation they're in. And here we come talking about, well, no, it's still possible to dig yourself out, to rebuild your community, to move yourself to a point where everybody is way better off. And there's lots of skepticism on that.
Mhm. So one of the tools that that I created throughout my career was I recognized that there was a lot of organizations, locally based nonprofits, faith communities, all who literally knew their neighborhoods quite well because they literally lived, grew, and raised their families there. And I found that a lot of these organizations, nonprofits, others that they had resources and assets, but they didn't know how to, or had the ability, or frankly, the capital to do things. So, for example, nonprofits that own properties in, shall we say, marginal areas that clearly were beginning to change, many of them because they were so land rich but cash poor, were found themselves in a position where they just had no options but to literally sell out to outsiders coming in who had all the capital in the world to do whatever they wanted by rights. And unfortunately, you lose a good part of the fabric of a community when the churches or the nonprofits who have served these communities for literally decades, in some cases, left. So the question I began to realize is why is there not a mechanism to work in partnership with a nonprofit, let's say, serving an underserved community like the deaf community, for example, here in DC, where they own their properties and now prime areas, but they didn't have the wherewithal, the ability to develop their properties, to improve their programs, and put themselves in a more financially stable position. In other words, inject some social enterprise concepts into and leverage the assets they do have. So what I found was they didn't have the expertise, they didn't have the culture of thinking, how can we raise money, or they didn't just had no idea how to do this. So I created a concept I called the Community Alliance Project, where our goal was literally to partner up with nonprofit organizations and help them pass that. We could help bring capital, we could help bring expertise, we could joint venture with them with the goal that we would be social investors that would bring patient money to make sure that that anchor in that community stays an anchor and their legacy and culture remains in the community, which, by the way, benefits everyone, including new people. My point here is that there's a whole industry and a whole series of opportunities to work with local organizations before they get pushed out for whatever reason. And as a result of that, basically RCI has been developed to be a capital raising arm to match up with these partnerships in the community. So RCI Community Funds, for example, is designed to bring together an aggregation of capital. So it could be from private impact investors, it could be from foundations that are now starting to finally invest in communities versus just providing grants. It could be crowdfunding. So RCI community funds is really an aggregation of various sources of capital that we want to bring to the table and then introduce or partner up with community-based organizations. So you take that partnership possibility and then you add another layer of education, which is very important. That's how the RCI Academy was formed. It was set up to create a venue to help educate those on the ground that normally just don't have access to this kind of education. And we have a nice group of people, including Bill Houston, who's the executive director of the academy, which, by the way, is a nonprofit. So the idea is if we can educate folks on the ground and then work with them if they need partners or access to capital. Maybe they don't need partners, but they just need the wherewithal. That's the whole idea, is let's leverage what they have with our ability to bring things to the table that most disinvested communities do not have. And again, that's a real tough compilation of bringing a lot of players together, but it's effective when it's done well and when we have the ability to really streamline all this. Then we create a new paradigm that becomes a real competition to the status quo that is unsustainable. And that's kind of where we're at. We're at the beginning of that road. It's going to be a long one, but there's definitely plenty of economic viability for how and why this would work.
Yeah, so Don, at that point, we have the classical outsider insider, I'll call it, challenge. We can walk into the community with a dozen different things that they need, that are not present in the community. So it isn't like we're competing with anyone who already exists, but now we have to tell our story. We have to tell it in a way that is acceptable to the community. And we're looking at different communication channels for getting the word out. We're looking to work with the community, not, again, cram down or mandate something to the community. How do you see telling that story best? How would we, get more people involved, get it to a point where we're talking equals, peer to peer, and achieve that sense of acceptance or invitation to come into the community and empower that community?
That's a terrific question also. And, after what Stephen was able to wonderfully articulate, what had occurred to me is that every opportunity is a rebranding opportunity because the perception usually doesn't match the reality. Coming from Detroit and going through what Detroit has gone through, and now it's starting to show up again, is finding what's unique, what's special, what's interesting about that community, or what could be special and interesting about that community. I mean, in the older days, you'd get off a highway and go to see the biggest ball of rubber bands, right? In some place in Nebraska, right? And that would be their claim to fame. Or if you go to Monroe, Michigan, which is on the way from Detroit to Toledo, you'll see General Custer's birthplace, right? So they celebrate something of that nature. Let's say you're a community. I know in the past shows you talked about an arts community, something that makes it special to that, and not trying to be everything to everybody because you'll probably be not that much to anybody. The other element, like you mentioned, with rural communities, and my wife comes from a one stoplight town in Western Pennsylvania, is that you have a bigger reach to other communities just like yours. And by helping band together and collectively do things, and it could be co-promotion and support, everybody has to appreciate that most of these communities have a wonderful group of hardworking people who are looking for a new opportunity and are ready to go to work, people who have property or whatever assets, want to take better advantage of them, but they get clouded out by the bigger messaging that goes on, and they tend to be a mumble. Where if now you can leapfrog and elevate beyond that and say ABC City is remarkable for this, and now we're adding this to make it even better. Well, now you're on the move. and now you're taking action. Now you're stating something instead of letting people think of something. And then it's the consistency of the message. And everybody, and again, most of these communities are challenged because of lack of investment, lack of resources, and it's hard to go get a fast start from a zero beginning. But if you actually have something that you can build on and continually uh, articulate in a leveraged, amplified reach that social media can do, everybody can put in that hour or two. So it's really the collective behavior. It's not like when we get money, we'll do something. Well, we got to do something while we're getting money. And maybe if we do something while we're trying to acquire capital or investors, that will be the thing that people say, wow, this person or this community is really taking the lead in a frontier type of opportunity like social media. There's so few people who know how to do what we're doing, and then even fewer people that can do it on a consistent basis and continue to build that, because association makes so much sense. If you have some high level thinkers, authors, whatever, who start coming on the community show, and there are a lot of people who give back. If you're in Washington, D.C., it'd be great to have some high level political figure or somebody that has some, let's say, reach, has some base of community, that brings more light to it. So it's really, until you get money, the only thing you can use is people and people's time and energy. But most people don't know how to leverage that in employing it, integrating it, and giving people a reason to enjoy it. Right? Because once they can learn how to do this, it never ends. It's not like start it and then something takes over. This is really the key. And then what happens next is progress. Everybody wants to hear the continuing story. Well, we just finally raised some money. We're going to open the store. Here's us at the grand opening. Here's interviewing these wonderful new owners of the ice cream parlor. And all of a sudden, you're getting attraction from the world, not just from your little community. And like we always say, you never know who's watching. You never know what the message will bring. And then by inviting people on your newsletters, and that's another thing we talked about. If you have a newsletter, keeping people constantly informed and not letting it slip is so valuable. And then you're going to be a step and a head and shoulders above everybody else. And that's going to make you feel like, hey, we're a little deficient here, but we're more than compensating over there. And the money and interest will catch up if we're interesting enough and worthwhile enough. So, start with what you have today, with who you are, but find something unique, something special, could be even something historical, and then build on it. And I know in Detroit now, when I go back, there's communities that nobody would have ever invested in. And now they're flourishing. Why? Because they branded themselves as this type of community, which distinguishes them from the other community. So that's what I would say. Spend your time branding, sharing what's unique, inviting people who have a common interest, the go-givers, more than just transactional people who had a history there. I know there's people like at Johns Hopkins. I know that Mr. Bloomberg was a alumni of it. And I think just a year or two ago, he provided enough scholarships so anybody who qualifies to go to school will get paid school. I think it was a couple $1 billion. So, look at who came from there. Look at who's still proud of there. Bring them back there in some way, shape, or form. So anyways, I believe that could be a very exciting attribute to anybody who's looking at community redevelopment.
Well, to your point, Bill Houston in the chat raises a question that's what you just touched on, which is how do you create a community-driven shared vision of community development? And as I'd mentioned before, that's kind of something I learned very quickly right up front. And no matter how well-intended you think you are, you still have to understand your community. So, for example, like I said, A lot of developers and others who think they're doing good will come in and say, we're here to help you people. We'll game over with that attitude. And believe me, the community knows and picks up that kind of attitude. I learned very quickly because one, I was been involved and lived and very comfortable in underserved communities, frankly, my entire life. I would go in no matter what, even if I was literally from the neighborhood, and I'd go in as a understanding that I was literally a guest in their neighborhood, and that was the attitude I'd take. So, for example, if a church that was a beautiful church at one time had a full flock, so on, et cetera, but was definitely in financial dire straits, but it used to be an anchored night community. We would approach the church and we would talk about how we could work together to create housing and other economic opportunity that would help the church, and do a joint venture where the church puts up their parking lot or the extra land, and we can create an opportunity where we fix the church and we create a revenue stream, and the church stays an anchor in there. The point I'm making here is the only way you do that is literally to get to know your community, be very sincere about what you're doing, and it takes a lot of discussion, sometimes several years, to create that trust that you aren't going to harm them, and also you could actually deliver on what you're trying to do. However, it's not an easy process, and it takes a lot of moving parts. So it's that kind of relationship that, again, will be the basis of our identifying opportunities and partners in the community, and will help bring certain things to the community that community may not have. However, without that community providing the real leadership and interest in being involved with this, then that's not necessarily always a prudent development or investment opportunity. So it's really important to know your community and gain trust.
Yeah, so one of the challenges we see is that we can't take many years. That just the time value of money. We have to bring money to bear on that community, to invest it in the community, to get it in motion. And so we have a need for speed, as I call it. And this is, as Steve just described it, this is, getting trust is essential to success, but we need to get trust in a hurry. This is something I deal with all the time in raising funding, where I'm trying to introduce an entrepreneur to an investor, and I want a relationship to form of a high enough quality virtually overnight so that they can decide to work with each other and put an investment into the entrepreneur and help them move forward. So as we are looking at a community investment fund approach, one of the things we have singled out is money that would go towards what we call community facilities, community projects. And these are, as they're currently defined, it's got to be something that benefits everyone in the community. We want to get away from the winners and losers mentality. We want to put something on the table at the very outset that says, this is for the community and you are part of the community and you can benefit from this, and here it is. So Steve and I have talked about art centers where you put on arts programs because they have the ability for everyone to participate, either as active in the program or in the audience as a form of entertainment. We're looking at every other type of thing we can do that would give a person a sense of, this is for me, about me, this is a good thing, and to do that out of the gate so that it's easy and quicker for us to build that level of trust. So Don, how would you see effectively communicating this message of we're not a bunch of outsiders, we are here to help, and we're working hard to work with you in the community? What kind of messaging, what kind of people would be involved? What might we do along that line?
Great question, because it's exactly in line with what I was thinking based on the conversation we're having, because you have to actually look at where are all the assets, where are all the resources. Again, it comes back to people. to Stephen's point, if you're going to be a community activist, why not involve the community and have it, knowing what the perception is, change the perception by maybe having every third Thursday being cleanup day, right? And maybe get the church involved or different organizations and say every third Thursday, we're going to have a plan that people can help sweep the sidewalks, clean the windows, do something to make the place sparkle. And it only takes one day of 20, 30 people. And all of a sudden people are going to have more pride in what they have, because you can't have people just say, overlook that, don't worry about that, because that's the reason people aren't coming. And that's another reason why people are leaving. So you got to stem the flow of people leaving. Like I say, that small town in Western Pennsylvania, as soon as a kid's 18, they get out of town because there isn't any opportunity. So why not employ those people to stay in town, do something for their neighbors, who in turn do something for themselves. And now you've got a mass group or a crowd of people, could be whatever number, that go to work on a project that's already assigned to them. If you allow people to think for themselves and, hey, when you get an opportunity, why don't you do this? Those things are never going to grow legs. But if you can say, hey, here's what we want to make our community better than even the communities around us. And people will invest where people are investing themselves. You can't ask an outsider to come in, clean this up for you. Well, you're living here. Your kids are going to school here. What kind of neighborhood do you want? And everybody can do a little bit to help themselves. And there's hope. And when there's hope, there's much more opportunity. And an investor will have some sort of let's say, sensitive part of them to say, yeah, I want to be part of this. It may not be the best return I could get for my money, but it's doing good for people who deserve a shot. And there has to be a reason why. What's going to change? Are we just going to put money in and then watch it dilute and then have to put more money in? Or are we just going to get it started, let it have some of its own force that takes over, and do a little bit better and have that vision that this year, this is what the picture of the community is. But next year, based on all these activities that we're about to do, here's what the new vision will be for next year. And then some of these volunteers can actually be stakeholders, right? The people who take the initiative, you might as well cut them into the deal somehow and make them a vested partner in one sense or another. And it could be just discounts like we talked about, or recognition is so important. And there's a lot of people who aren't employed in some of these areas. And they do have the opportunity to do something worthwhile, and maybe give them something for that to justify it. You were saying, Steve, it seems like.
No, I was agreeing with you. And what you're really talking about is creating a sense of community. When you live in these underserved, disinvested communities, and again, I have, where no one knows each other, you don't talk to your neighbors, you are not going to have a healthy community. But when you begin to sort of connect with your neighbors and create a sense of community, like we used to experience maybe when we were kids, then you can start doing things. And that's the hard part, is how do you get a community to come together? And I'll give you a quick example. And Carl made reference to this a few minutes back, and that is community centers, or art community centers. I helped start an art center right outside of DC, where I live, where we were very underserved, and the community wasn't very healthy. But the arts center turned into we set up a storefront, and then turned into 3 storefronts, and then eventually we did so well. We bought a warehouse in town and built out an organization now has been serving about 100,000 people a year for quite some time, and they do very well. But the benefit of that organization was they created a sense of community and a connection, and people were able to come to the center, which wasn't just about dance or this, that, and the other. It brought people together. And then what happened was the coffee shop owner or prospect saw this, and he came in and he set up a coffee shop, and it just really set off a whole series of economic development, to the point where this art center was the impetus behind a tremendous amount of investment in an area that had been neglected for decades. And it helped to create the effort for local community development Corporation, which brought in more resources, and the Development Corporation was plugged into our local and statewide political. So all of a sudden, our little funky town, and it was funky, was able to leverage this little art center into something that has really rebuilt it with a strong sense of connection and community pride that really set it off. And it was a good base to build off of. And that's very important and hard to do because it's not part of our economic development paradigm. People just don't understand how important it is to bring people together, build a campus, so to speak, that can then reverberate into other complementary community health building and community wealth building projects. So that's a tough thing to do. But again, we have all the components, the experience, the examples of how neighborhoods can change when you bring all these things together. And of course, two major things: capital, but you have to have the right people and a dynamic to bring the right people to do this well. Outsiders can't come in here and achieve this. And if they do, it's usually, just real standard, not very aesthetic kind of development that really doesn't last in communities.
Well, to that point, I know I have to leave in about 5 minutes, so I'll take an extra slice right now. Is you have resources. In Baltimore, you got the Baltimore Orioles, you got the Baltimore Ravens. I'm sure there's a player or two that would show up for an event to support that, right? They're always supporting community events. Mm-hmm. Second thing is something like Pizza Day for all the volunteers. You can get pizzas for $10 at Costco, for $100, and maybe there should be an allocation in the investment for these ancillary activities that, hey, every week or every month, if you're in a shopping center, usually the landlord every so often will do something special for the tenants, right? They'll put together a pizza party, or they'll send a turkey on Thanksgiving just to show their appreciation and their connection. But why do it alone? Why not access everybody who's already there but doesn't know? A Baltimore Oriole shortstop is not going to say, oh, I'm going to go to that area because they're doing something. First of all, they don't know what you're doing. Second of all, you can invite them and somebody will show up. Maybe it's the minor league player who just made the team and wants a piece of pizza for themselves. But, it's you being able to be dynamic in your scheduling of activities in order for that to be justifiable, because then the community gets excited. Well, hey, the quarterback's showing up next week and we're going to have pizza, and it's all for the people who are out there cleaning the streets today. So there has to be more than an altruistic return. There has to be, wow, they thought this was important to share their time. The people who are putting money in are providing activities for the people in the community. And those are the people who you need most to support the businesses. So instead of just having a property business focus, have a people focus that aligns with it. And you can always get more and more people excited. And here's the key. Once they get excited, they start exciting the people around them, right? So pretty soon the kids are showing up, and pretty soon their relatives are showing up. And after a while, the community gets overtaken by people doing constructive things, where in the past they've just been accustomed to destructive things, which is guard yourself, be safe, get some more locks, as opposed to open more doors, open more opportunities, have something going on that's fun, that's exciting, that's worthwhile, because that's the vibe you want. And you need to get a vibe going, and energy. And there are districts around the country and cities that when you go into it, whether it's in San Francisco or LA, hey, there's a vibe here. And it has nothing to do with its past, but everything to do with its future. And that's the story you tell the community when you come in. You don't keep it a secret, or you don't let them see it for themselves. You expose it all the time. And it also shows you to be a benevolent investor, that we're not just clearly about the money. We're willing to invest ourselves into the people, into the community, into the activity. Because again, like we talked about earlier, anything you can stage properly, you can scale properly. And what works in Baltimore will work in Cleveland, will work everywhere, but having a little bit more pizzazz to it and a little bit more heart to it. I think that's really the key, is not just making a profit, but making a difference. And the difference makes a profit for you. So in order to really take advantage, I think that would be the key. So my thoughts before leaving, and I can stick around for another minute or two, is rebrand yourself as what you believe and you should be. And that's where you're going to be reaching towards. But also bring everybody to the party as much as you can, and to Carl's point, as fast as you can, because if you're going to look at investors, it'd be great to have them there when the Baltimore Orioles shortstop is there and when the pizza party's going on. Or even more importantly, since you can't bring them there physically, you can bring them there with a show, right? Next week's show, we're coming from Abe's Pizza Parlor. And isn't this exciting? We got 20 volunteers getting the store ready for them. And here's a celebrity that happened to show up. And pretty soon you get that wow factor. And it only took someone to make a couple phone calls to somebody, no cost. And you're also leveraging everybody's time and effort, not your own. So everybody pulling together the right way with direction, with just tell me what I need to do and how I need to do it. And now you're training people, and hopefully maybe those are the people who get jobs in these new businesses. And all of a sudden it just builds on itself. So I got too excited today, Carl.
That's good. That's what we're here for. If you get excited, then we can get other people excited. And I agree with you. I think that the trick is to let people feel involved, to see value, to see the benefit of doing things together. We'll take baby steps as we get started. We'll just see how long it takes us to get to a full tilt sprint. But Don, thanks for being on the show today. I know you've got another appearance, your own show that will come on here in 7 minutes later today. And Don is an expert on LinkedIn. He provides consulting services to people like myself, to organizations, and helps build coalitions and cohorts of people working together towards a common purpose, which is what we're trying to do here within RCI. We're hoping to build a series of community investment funds in underserved communities across the United States. We're just getting started. So Don, thanks for being with us today. And Steve and I will finish out the show.
Well, thank you both, Carl and Stephen, and look forward to having this not my first, but a continuing opportunity to appear with you, and hopefully roll up my sleeves and kind of help you wherever I can to get this going, because I think it is well deserving. And I believe in Stephen, and I really believe in Carl. And knowing that, you always get benefit from being with like-minded people who are doing the right thing the right way. So I'll sign off so I can sign back on to another show, and we'll talk again. Thank you so much again.
Thanks, Don.
You
We'll
bet.
be sure to take you up on your offer.
Okay, please.
Uh-huh.
So great conversation with Don Cohen, and a lot of good points and issues have come up in this conversation about getting a community engaged, creating a sense of community. It's a word that we throw out there, but it's kind of a difficult thing to do sometimes, where a community is fragmented, it's lost its sense of commonality. And as Don was suggesting, there are things we can do that benefit the community. We'll work towards doing those things that benefit everyone, and setting up communication channels within the community, which that may not exist or need to be improved upon, so that people have knowledge about what's going on. They have an opportunity to participate. They see people coming together, working together, that will benefit them directly or indirectly. So lots of things to do there. One of the points Don made was that when we talk about getting people to invest in the community, this is one of the challenges that we're working with within RCI is under the concept of community capital. Our goal is to bring wealth into the community and get it to settle down or anchor down in that community. So when we put together a community investment fund, we are going to give priority preference to the people, the businesses, organizations within the community to be investors. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we're working with investment crowdfunding. This is a law that was put into effect in 2016 that gives everyone who's an adult an opportunity to invest in businesses and other for-profit projects in their backyard. This empowers everyone who's an adult to be a stockholder instead of simply a stakeholder. They get to actually own and participate in the wealth building as opposed to watching somebody else get wealthy. And at the same time, though, we recognize we'll probably need money from outside the community, at least on a temporary basis, to get this out of the gates, get stuff started. So we're designing these funds to use a combination of local money, neighborhood money, and outside money, but with the intent of moving to it being completely owned and controlled and managed for the benefit of the community as quickly as possible. So the complexities keep unfolding, but nonetheless, we feel adequate to the challenge. And setting up communications, as we've talked about with Don today, we see is a critical element in getting started, in putting a stake in the ground, and as Steve described it, creating a reverb effect where this creates another positive effect, which creates two positive effects, and we get a geometric impact here. So last thoughts, Steve, for today before we call it a day for this show.
Yeah, I think that the theme today is there's a lot of moving parts to really create effective long-term community wealth building and other health, community health efforts. So it takes a lot of skills, a lot of networks, a lot of sectors to come together. And more than ever, I think the right ingredients are coming together, particularly since I think the next few years there's going to be a lot more less reliance on funding from various sources that we've been accustomed to. So all in all is we are driving change through social enterprise, but also without discounting how important it is to have strong partnerships within the communities we want to invest and to help support.
Well, I think that's a great way to close the show for today. Thank you to our audience for listening in. The show will be recorded and available on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube for those who were unable to make it to this time slot in today. Thanks, Steve, for being with me today as a co-host on the Community Revitalization Show. And we will be back next week with Karen Pollock, who will be our guest. Karen is a dynamic. The week after December, isn't it? Next? Oh, I'm sorry. Good point. Next week is
People want to join us Thanksgiving, no problem.
There will be no show next week because we will be out celebrating or giving thanks or simply just taking a break. Depends on how you want to look at it. But in 2 weeks, yes, we'll have Karen as our guest. She is a dynamic thought leader on everything that we're talking about today. Very much looking forward to that program. So you all in the audience and everyone, you're invited back in 2 weeks, and enjoy Thanksgiving next week.